Hey, Lara. So excited to have you today on the Holistic Hub podcast. I know we just spent the last 20 minutes chatting about our fur babies, which is really great. And we were like, you know what? We should just make an entire episode on cats. But
Yes.
you know what? We're going to talk about water quality today. But
Fine.
it's
Cats
been,
are another
so,
time,
yeah.
apparently. It's
But
really
thanks
heartbroken,
so
but
much for being a guest. Super fun
of
to have you
course,
on.
very happy to be here.
Aw. It's crazy because as I was getting ready for the interview, I was thinking about honestly how it's kind of come full circle for me, at least because you were somebody who's really opened my eyes to environmental chemicals. I had started to learn about a lot of stuff here and there 7 years ago, but following your Instagram account, Environmental Toxin Nerd, and just getting on your newsletter, I started to learn so much. And then I just ended up taking your live course for 5 months back in 2021. And
Yeah.
now here I am, and I'm wanting to interview you because honestly, in my eyes, you're one of the original people that really just was getting on the stage, front and foremost, just talking about this important topic. So I'm, really excited to dive into water quality today because I think it's a really important topic and still has a lot of misinformation out there. So I think it'll be a good one.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, first, can you kind of just tell us a little bit about you, who you are, what got you started in environmental chemicals and wanting to educate on this?
Yeah, I mean, look, I didn't grow up dreaming of one day teaching about plastics and PFAS chemicals. Obviously, didn't know what those things were. But yeah, I mean, like a lot of people, I just kind of stumbled into this topic that really kind of both fascinated me and infuriated me at the same time, equal parts. Mostly because, although we, don't have absolute concrete, irrefutable proof of harm of a lot of the chemical exposures that exist, and for lots of reasons that are legitimately good because we don't test chemicals on people and blah 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 blah.
Right.
But we have enough information, we have enough knowledge to be more proactive than we currently are, and that both from a regulatory standpoint and from product manufacturing standpoint, people aren't being proactive, was really infuriating to me. I was like, well, we can do this better. You just don't want to spend the money to try.
Right.
And so that part really kind of fueled me to say okay, well, in the interim, before we get better policy and that sort of wanes, comes and goes, we're in a go phase right now in terms of good restrictions going away, I just really wanted to kind of give people a little bit of more context to say what is this? What do I need to do? Where am I being exposed? What matters? What doesn't matter? And that work really evolved. I mean, I've been doing this for 14 plus years now. And so the landscape has completely changed in that time period when I started having this conversation. Certainly the research had been happening. The research has been happening for decades. In academia, that's I'm certainly no new voice out there within that space, but within the holistic wellness space and that type of arena, 14 years ago, nobody was talking about this really. And so, I just felt it was an enormous gap. And for all the practitioners that I have been working with during that time who are working with people on their own health issues, I'm like, well, okay, well, this is something that we need to know about, because it is part of what is happening. It is a contributing factor to pretty much every chronic illness that we can think of. There is data showing or suggesting sometimes causal relationships, sometimes associative relationships between environmental exposures and fill in the blank chronic illness. And so it's a hugely important topic, and I have stuck with it this entire time because it's such a fascinating. It's such a dynamic topic. There's literally new information coming out all the time. There's, new research, new policy, new products. The entire landscape of the environmental health conversation is so vast that you can never get bored.
Yeah.
Truly. There's you want to talk about disproportionate exposures, environmental justice. You want to talk about the international product manufacturing supply chains. There's just it's endless. And so for somebody who's a information hungry person, there's like no shortage of information here to learn. So yeah, that's I don't sort of a roundabout answer, but yeah, I kind of stumbled into this and I love it. I think it's really important.
You couldn't turn like a blind eye to it. Like once you kind of uncovered it, you're like, this was just, you probably were so like hungry for more information regarding like, oh, this could be related to so many of your clients at the times, like health issues or like reasons that they were coming to see you, because at least I see it be pretty much a part of almost every person's picture that I work with. But again, it's like, it was probably something that you were like, you learned it and you're like, you can't like ignore it at that point.
Yeah. I mean, and as soon as I sort of started to kind of learn more about this space, I really just shifted my work away from working with people individually to just do this. But, you know, there's a little kind of irony baked in here, because for the last 25-ish, 30 years, probably 25-ish years, my dad has actually worked as a consultant in the coating industry. So PFAS coating, nonstick coating. And so when I was in college, it was like in the, I want to say probably 1998 or 1999. I graduated college in 99, my undergrad, and I was emailing articles about Teflon toxicosis, which is like, it's like the Teflon flu, but for birds, which is like this fatal reaction that birds have to the release of PFAS chemicals in the air if somebody's like overheating a pan in their house. So bird owners know we don't have those items in our homes. And so I was forwarding articles to my dad, and he was forwarding them to the president of the company. So I was like, I've been like a thorn in the side of this industry for far longer than I actually thought I was. But yeah, so I just like that, I forgot about that until about, 5 or 6 years ago. I was like, actually, you know what? I totally used to do that.
You were born for this. Yeah.
Yes.
This is like your path. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Well, I think actually what would be kind of cool to set the stage. I was going to start with something a little different, but now that we're kind of talking about this, and something you kind of, alluded to like off air, was talking about, how things have like really shifted like online now on social media, like what we're seeing, like how we're seeing people even talk about environmental chemicals, like where, the framework is going, and how it just isn't the same. It isn't what we should be wanting to see and supporting now. And so can you kind of like maybe touch a little bit on that for people listening, just like what has changed actually, maybe like even in the talks of like environmental chemicals now?
I'm like, oh God, that's a whole podcast
it's
in and
kind
of
of a
itself.
loaded question.
But yeah, it's a huge question, because it's like, where do I start? So, like as I was saying earlier, the research into environmental health has been happening for decades. And for decades, it's been very much a nonpartisan issue, because clean air is for everyone, and clean water is for everyone, and safe food and safe products are for everyone. And, there's a lot of things that I think have been part of the slow shift, in the 70s, when we started, with the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the passage of like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, like that was the sort of heyday of environmentalism, where like collectively as a country, we were like, yeah, we need to do better than we're doing. And we're going to pass all this legislation to make sure that happens. And those have been predominantly like bipartisan efforts. And, I think that there's probably a lot of different shift points, but the one that stands out for me is the passage of Citizens United, which gives corporations essentially the voting rights of a person. And so this is what flooded politics with corporate interest money. And so now we have these, and we have had for a long time, but like these enormous lobby groups for the chemical industry, for the agricultural industry, for the plastics industry, you name it, that are really pushing to have policy put in place that is better for them, regardless of the impact elsewhere, right? It is a very profits over people approach. And so, the conversation has been shifting both in a bad way, meaning that regulations have gotten like much harder to pass. It took us 40 years to update the Toxic Substances Control Act, which was like the primary piece of legislation that regulated most chemicals in commerce. It took 40 years to update that.
crazy.
which is like, that's insane, right?
Yeah.
And we only just recently updated our policy on cosmetics, which was first created in 1938.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
what are we doing? Like, what are we doing? And so, while at the same time that, lobby groups and industry interests have kind of slowed progress compared to how fast progress was moving, in the 70s, 80s, et cetera, for the passage of, laws to ban lead paint, like whatever, like that. So while that has gotten slower, the awareness of chemicals has gotten, just among the general population, has gotten a lot more elevated. So a lot of people know about BPA and microplastics and PFAS and things like that. And even if they don't know exactly what it is, they've probably heard the terms.
Yeah.
And 10, 15 years ago, like that was not at all the case. So the fact that more and more people are talking about it, more news stories are being written about it, more research is being done in this area is amazing. And so that has been a really positive, hopeful thing to see, because the more eyes are on it, the more funding gets into this research. That's very much on the line right now. But the more connections that we can start to make, and then that data can help support future regulation or what have you. And so at this time where the topic of environmental toxins and environmental chemicals has been growing in terms of awareness, two things I think have happened simultaneously. One, you have this, explosion of social media and content creators and influencers and what have you that are very much leaning into the currency of social media algorithms, which is engagement.
Yeah.
And engagement is not necessarily a reflection of accuracy. It's just, it's like a lot of it is rage bait content, or it is just intended to be sensational and to get people really, riled up, because that translates to likes, clicks, link in bio movement, whatever, go buy my supplement, whatever that whole cascade is. And so what that's done is over the last, I want to say maybe like 5 or 6 years, mostly in the last, maybe I say 3 years, the conversation about toxins online has become like this totally absurd, overstated, overhyped, overblown, sensationalized, like clown show, like horror show, where people are talking about these exposures as if like the sky is falling, that it's the grand conspiracy because the government's trying to kill you. And so there's all this like stuff that's hiding the reality of and the nuance, completely smothering any nuance in this conversation. And that's been really frustrating for me. And so at the same time that that's happening, now we have people in the current administration that are centering the concept of environmental exposures. But they are centering the spotlight on a aspect or a specific exposure. I'll just use the red food dye thing as an example. That is like literally the least important thing to be addressing. Not to say that like I want everybody to consume red food dye. That's not what I'm saying. But there is a huge gap or misunderstanding, or I don't know if it's just people intentionally turning a blind eye, because again, there's like this engagement, juicy topic that like the news can really latch onto, like this red food dye thing. But it's being had at the expense of exposures that we have absolutely concrete evidence that are not only associative, but have causal relationships to disease, like air pollution. And so the same administration that's saying we're going to help clean up toxins by taking red food dye out are also allowing the deregulation of industries that will result in increased levels of pollution that will directly lead to people's deaths, whereas red food dye never killed anyone. The data that we have on red food dye is that like a small subset of children with ADHD may have increased behavioral issues when they consume red food dye. But that's like such a small fraction of the population. And the evidence is not strong. So when we have weak evidence, that a extremely small population of people are going to be affected, and then extraordinarily strong evidence that the entire population is going to be affected. And we're looking over here. We are wasting the critical resources, time, energy, focus that we have at this time. And so it's been really disheartening to kind of see that the way that the conversation is being had is actually, I think, doing a lot more harm than good. And I'm sure there's people out there that will disagree with me on that. But like, I just, I have a lot to say on this topic. It's a whole nother podcast. But
so
yeah,
I mean, I just,
yes, I just, a cat podcast.
Yeah, cat.
I just, so I'm just like, it's frustrating to see the way that the conversation is being pushed through this like distortion filter where the loudest voices that are on social media or in government right now are actually sharing incorrect information that is not supported by evidence. And the topic of environmental health is already by too many people inappropriately dismissed as being like, it's just, not that important. And then that's not true, right? We absolutely know that that's not true. And yet it's already kind of at this spot where it's like not getting the attention that it deserves. And then you have this, wave of individuals coming in the administration and outside of the administration that are doing even more harm to this work and this conversation. So like, I get really, pissy about it, to be honest.
No. It's so important to be, having these kinds of conversations. And I think even like something that I want to like piggyback off what you're saying is like, when I was in your cohort for those 5 months, like something that you really like emphasized with us was talking about how when we're educating people on environmental toxins, like there's way too much, and this was like 4 or 5 years ago, we were having this conversation. There's too much emphasis on like the fear mongering side of things. And what does that lead to? That leads to people getting overwhelmed and not making changes. And so then
being stressed out and anxious, which like we also know has very strong evidence is associated with poor health outcomes. And so, I mean, this has just been a thing that I've been and I said this recently in one of my student groups, is that, when I first started doing this work 14 years ago, and at the time I was like, people weren't talking about environmental exposures sort of within the wellness health space that I was in at the time. And so the big part of my work was actually just trying to like convince people that like, yes, this actually is a problem. And now the focus of the work is actually pulling people back from this like hysteria, this really panicked place, because other people have just dogpiled on to this space and then pushed it to this like weird extreme space. And then the other kind of downside to that is there is this overcorrective reflexive response that happens from people that maybe are, medically trained or have PhDs or whatever in, chemistry or cosmetic formulation or whatever, that are like reflexively overcorrecting in response to the ludicrous claims that are being had over here. And for example, people saying like, oh, the government, glyphosate is going to kill you. It's killing us. We can't ever be exposed to it. It's like, okay, well, like, that's a bit extreme. And then on the other hand, you have people responding to that by saying anybody who's saying pesticides are harmful is fear-mongering, is sensationalizing, and doesn't know what they're talking about. Pesticides are totally safe. And I'm like, okay, but that's also not true.
Yeah, right.
Like literally that's also not true. And so, and certainly the environmental health space is not the only space where like nuance has been completely lost. I think we can probably agree that that's happening in a lot of different places, but that's the sort of like these extremes that I see people falling into. And it's really, it's just, they're distractions. The problems are legitimately real and concerning. And we've got academics that have been spending their entire careers doing nothing but research into this space. And it's really dismissive of all of that work.
Yeah. And like exactly what you're kind of, again, going off of what you're saying is that then people are going to see the people like, the PhDs or the people that are working in these industries, like overcorrecting versus compared to the people that are kind of more fear mongering. And then it just becomes even more confusing because it's like, okay, wait, so I heard this is bad. So it's actually not bad. So what do I do? And it's very, very tough for people. And, the work that I do, I'm working with a lot of people with, dealing with mold toxicity. And again, the supports I try to put out on Instagram and the information is awareness and things that you can do to support yourself. I can't tell you, like on my feed, I actually don't even scroll on my feed anymore because I will just go on to post and maybe respond to messages because honestly, my algorithm is going to be mainly people talking about mold. And so, but the amount of either misinformation or fear mongering that I see, even coming from practitioners, it really makes me upset and then I have clients sending me information from Instagram. They're like, is this true? And I'm like, honestly, I don't even know what to say anymore because it's just really hard to see what it is as the listener and the viewer, like that doesn't have a lot of knowledge behind the topics already. They just don't know who to believe anymore. They don't know if they're doing the right protocols or this or that. And it's become a crazy space in pretty much all areas of like environmental chemical exposures. It's just wild.
It's really, it's wild.
Yes.
It's wild.
Wild to put it lightly.
It's a nice way to say it.
Exactly. So I guess to kind of now, carry on over to talk about water quality, at the beginning, you were talking about like regulatory bodies and governance and all this type of stuff. So when it comes to water quality, this is something that is like very important, obviously, because like our bodies are made up of like 60-70% water. Like we drink, hopefully 8 to 10 cups of water a day, all this kind of stuff. So that's a lot of exposure to different things that could be in the water supply. So this is why I wanted to have this conversation because it's such a large exposure. Now, that being said, I really want this to be obviously educational. So like who is the governing body like surrounding our water quality? Like how are there like, supports in place to, keeping up to date with the possible like newer contaminants we might be getting exposed to? Let's provide a little education on this.
So the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, is tasked with overseeing public drinking water, and they do that through the Safe Drinking Water Act, which was one of those 1970s pieces of legislation that was passed. And these regulations only apply to public water. So for people who are on well water, this does not apply to you. None of this applies to you. So private wells are unregulated, at least at the federal level, and then public water is regulated. And the Safe Drinking Water Act doesn't have, first of all, it only regulates about 90 contaminants. There are hundreds that have been identified in the drinking water. Certainly, not necessarily at levels that are like extremely toxic. None of the contaminants that we're exposed to in drinking water are acutely toxic. And so I think it's helpful even just to frame like what do we mean when we're talking about toxic? Because some people will hear that word and they think like, oh, I've been exposed to something and my skin is going to blister and my hair is going to fall out and I'm going to vomit and have to go to the emergency room. That's not at all what we're talking about here. Those exposures do happen. They can happen primarily in the workplace. That's why we have organizations like OSHA, which regulate chemicals in the workplace and oversee safety factors, procedures, measures in the workplace. And so, we have all of these unregulated chemicals that are in our drinking water that are not acutely toxic, but they can be harmful and have health impacts when we are exposed to them chronically over time. Which is, if people live in the same place, they are exposed to the same contaminants throughout their entire lifetime. And certainly there are going to be windows of time when the exposures that they're getting might be more impactful. So, for example, if somebody's planning on getting pregnant or is pregnant, there's a lot of, has an infant. Those are really sensitive windows. And so the amount of contaminant in drinking water in their communities might only show up as harm in these certain populations. And then the other challenging thing about this is not just for water quality, this is really for everything, is that because we're talking about like chronic low levels of exposure over time, it can be really difficult to like pin the tail on the donkey and say like, it was this exposure that caused that health outcome because the latency period can be decades.
Yeah.
right? Decades.
Yep.
There's exposures that happen during fetal stages of fetal development might not manifest until that infant is 30 or 40 years old. And so it's really hard to say like, it was this chemical or it was that chemical or it was this exposure or that exposure. But we do have hundreds and hundreds of chemicals, contaminants in our drinking water that are harmful or potentially harmful to varying degrees, and that those levels fluctuate over time. So if you live in an agricultural area and there's going to be shifts in the, say, pesticide residues in the water based on when in the season is it? Are we in the spring? Are we in the fall? Are we in the winter? Like what's happening around us? So we have a lot of chemicals in the water. Only about 90 of them are regulated. So that's like disinfectants and disinfection byproducts, so like chlorine, and then the byproducts that are produced, microorganisms, so like bacteria and viruses, inorganic chemicals like lead or arsenic, solvents, pesticides, and in some cases, radioactive compounds, radionuclides, radionuclides, said that wrong, can be in the water. So this is kind of what we're dealing with. The amount of chemicals that are permitted, air quotes, in the water as set by the Safe Drinking Water Act are not health standards. That's oftentimes people are thinking that like, if this is in my water, but my water report says it's like safe, it's because it meets the Safe Drinking Water Act standard. That's not a safety standard. It's a negotiation between what public health experts want to see and what is feasible from a financial standpoint for water utilities to address. And now you've opened up this whole can of worms of the economic burden of the cost of water filtration and why communities who are more affluent have better water quality because their tax dollars there's more tax dollars to go to fund to upgrades to their water utilities, and that low income states, communities, whatever, don't have the financial leverage to even get that passed. So there's often poor water quality among lots of other environmental factors. So there's like so many layers to this conversation. So we have lots of contaminants in the water. 90-ish are regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act. Many contaminants are still present. Just because they're regulated doesn't mean that they're not there. Many places are in violation of Safe Drinking Water Acts all the time. And not all contaminants are tested every single year. Some of them are only tested every couple years. So we actually don't know. It's not very accurate monitoring. And there certainly is evidence that some of these environmental contaminants in drinking water can either lead to or contribute to serious chronic illness. Really depends on what it is, what the contaminant is. PFAS has been found, these PFAS chemicals, almost 50% of the US has detectable PFAS in their drinking water. And we know that there's no safe level of exposure to these chemicals. And so here we are, right? That's kind of what we're looking at in terms of who is doing this monitoring and kind of a little bit of the framework of what we're dealing with in terms of contaminants and regulations.
Well, I'm excited to kind of dive into this with you, like for the listeners too, on like what people can do to maybe like monitor their water, and then what they can do to like, help filter and things like that. But first, you brought up one of the contaminants that are in water supplies that, is added to all our water. And you said it's monitored as well as chlorine. And I would love for you to really actually just talk a little bit about that and the possible, I guess, like health implications, what people should maybe at least just like kind of be aware of, like when it comes to that, in terms of like the water, supply.
Yeah. I mean, I think chlorine's a really good example of like, the nuance that's required to look at this conversation, because chlorine is there in the water to treat bacteria and viruses so that we don't have dysentery, we don't have cholera in our drinking water, we don't have waterborne communicable diseases in the United States as a general rule because we chlorinate our water. And so there is I would say, it is a very positive thing to do to chlorinate our water, right? We need to do that. And that doesn't mean that it's not without issue. And so what happens is, one, you have chlorine residues that show up in the water. When chlorine interacts with organic matter that's kind of naturally present in the water, it can create what are called disinfection byproducts. And those byproducts can actually be more harmful, more, quote, toxic than the chlorine itself. And so you have, haloacetic acid, trihalomethanes, which are produced. These are these disinfection byproducts. And some of these disinfection byproducts are on that safe drinking water regulation list. So they're monitored. And so that's a problem. And then, because chlorine has a smell and a taste, some cities have switched to using chloramine, which is a combination of chlorine and ammonia. And they switched to that because it has less odor and less taste, but also it stays in the distribution system longer. So chlorine volatilizes. So if anybody's had like a goldfish and you have to change the water tank, you're supposed to fill up a container of water, a gallon of water, and let it sit for 24 hours before you introduce that into the water. And the reason for that is to volatilize off any chlorine that would otherwise create a very hostile environment for that fish to live. Amphibians and fish, aquatic animals are very sensitive to their environment. And so chlorine volatilizes in the water system. And so, you're going to have more chlorine in the water system at the point of the treatment than you will necessarily in your kitchen sink, which can potentially weaken, excuse me, excuse me, pause.
Yeah, we can edit it.
Thank you. That, if you have chlorine at higher concentration at the treatment plant and it sort of dissipates as it goes through the system, you're potentially opening the door to increases in the risk of pathogenic bacteria towards the tail end of the delivery system. So chloramine solves that problem. It stays in the distribution system longer. It's also a lot harder to remove from the water.
Yeah.
So, everything is a pro and con. Like, yeah, okay, it doesn't smell, doesn't taste bad, but it stays in the water longer. It's harder to remove. I think chloramines produce less of the disinfection byproducts. But anyway, so yeah, chlorine is important, and it's also one of the easiest contaminants to remove. So the upshot there is that, like, a basic activated carbon filter, which is the bare minimum of water filters, will remove or reduce most chlorine. Chloramine is different. That's harder to remove. But chlorine is pretty easy to remove. So activated carbon can remove or reduce what's in your water easily. So, like, I very much come from the, like, any water filtration is better than no water filtration.
Yeah.
And so, like, at a bare minimum, we're looking at a carbon filter to tackle some of that.
Which are pretty easy to come across. I feel like a lot of the filters that you want is like literally going to have that. Yeah. So that's always what's nice.
At a minimum, every filter is going to have
that. That's again, what's like, I just was so excited to bring you on because it's like, it's very refreshing to chat with you because like you have like the, and this, right? It's like, it's not a fully black and white scenario. Like chlorine is important, to be able to protect us from certain things, but also, yes, like long-term, there can be some health implications. And that's where we can utilize something like a bit of a filter. But like, again, there's going to be the pros and cons. And what you kind of talked about too with the, with being such a volatile organic like compound, like since it volatilizes, sorry, not volatile organic compound, since it volatilizes, when you're in the
VOC. Yeah.
Okay. And when it's in the, like, when we're showering, right? Like that is like another like exposure route that it was something that I had become more aware of when I had chatted with you years ago regarding like that might even be considering more of an important piece because of that, because of the exposure in the shower. And so that's where, utilizing a shower filter can be like so easy to do too, and to help just kind of like reduce a little bit of exposure as well. Like when you're,
it's easier on your hair and skin, just as like an upshot. So like, I think it's kind of funny because over the last, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years, there's all these like beauty water filters that have come out. For like your bathroom sink and your shower head. And they're like, very like stylish, and they're more like aesthetic than functional, even though there are have some functionality. And their marketing angle is that it's better for your skin and your hair. And they're not wrong, but all it's doing is it's taking out chlorine. Like any other water filters or shower filter. So like, do you need to spend $120 on a fancy shower head that has a built-in filter, or can you just get a $50 water filter that you replace every 6 months? You can do the cheaper one. Like de-influencing people from buying these like, fancy filters. I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, no, agreed. So then kind of moving on into talking maybe about other chemicals found. You already talked about PFAS chemicals. So that was an important topic. We talked about chlorine. So like, there's other things that can be contaminating our water supply. And I kind of wanted to shed light on maybe a couple that you find really important to talk about, whether it's heavy metals or pharmaceuticals or, anything of that nature or anything that I didn't talk about already, but maybe just so people become a little bit more aware of like things that aren't getting regulated in our water supply that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, PFAS is the most important one because the threshold of harm is so low.
Yeah.
There is no safe level. The same thing obviously applies to lead in the drinking water. So those two things, we at the end of 2024, I don't remember where we were in terms of the progress, but the Biden administration had put forth a lot of money to finally, after too many decades of being fully aware that we still have lead distribution pipes in the country, there's a enormously important funding that went towards replacing lead service lines in places that still have lead pipes, of which there are many places. I don't remember how many thousands of miles of lead pipes still exist. And so those continue to be a problem. And those are just like the service lines that the water utilities manage, those not necessarily the service line from the main street line into the house. Those are not managed by the city. That's like homeowner stuff. And so, if the home is old, then that lead, that there might be lead in that last stretch of pipe leading into the home. So that whole program to replace lead pipes in the United States has either been pulled back or just completely nixed, which is, I don't have anything nice to say about that. It's the opposite of what we should be doing. So I think, lead is certainly something to be concerned about. Arsenic is actually one of the most concerning water contaminants. It's not in everybody's water. It is very like a regional issue because it's the arsenic it's in the earth. That is, it's not distributed 100% evenly across the country. So like I live in New Mexico, parts of New Mexico have incredibly high arsenic levels in the water. Arsenic is very difficult to remove. Like your carbon filter won't take it out, but arsenic exposure is linked to diabetes, other metabolic diseases and cancers, lung cancer of all things. You wouldn't think that drinking water would lead to lung cancer, but it can. And so that's a contaminant that a lot of people don't talk about. Probably because it's not ubiquitous, it's not sort of universal for people to have that. But if it's there, it's a problem. I would say even more so than, some of these other chemicals, because again, we're looking at the way that I would look at this is what is the weight of the evidence when comparing these contaminants? And we have really substantial evidence that arsenic exposure through drinking water is associated with all of these serious health issues. And some of the other chemicals like pesticides in the water, like they shouldn't be there. There is probably some epidemiological evidence that there is associations between pesticide levels in the water and specifically in the drinking water and adverse health outcomes, but the data is not as robust as it is for something like arsenic. And then it's also really hard to tease out, just to use the example of pesticides, is all of the pesticide exposure that somebody's dealing with from the water, or is some because they live in an agricultural region and there's drift from their farms where somebody else neighboring farms are spraying? Is it from their food? Whereas arsenic is predominantly exposures coming through water. So it's like a little bit easier to kind of tease apart the noise that is present in all epidemiological research.
Just on the topic of arsenic, another exposure of that from what I had read like a while ago was like regarding like rice as well. Is that also like kind of a large exposure as well, like being careful about like your rice sourcing, or is it like you mentioned, like predominantly like something we need to be aware of with our water?
I think predominantly our water, it is present in rice, and that's also a geographic thing.
Yeah.
So it depends on where the rice is grown.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Rice grown in California or in like India and Pakistan tends to be lower in arsenic, whereas rice grown in the southern United States has higher arsenic. And the reason for that is because rice farms are typically on what used to be cotton plantations.
Mm-hmm.
And those cotton plantations were treated with arsenical pesticides.
Okay.
And so those, because arsenic is an element, it stays in the soil. Yeah. And so rice grown in that region, rice is a hyper accumulator, so it sucks up arsenic from the soil.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where like white rice is actually better than brown rice because brown rice has more arsenic. And I think the community that's probably most impacted by this are children who eat a lot of rice cereals, rice crackers, rice cakes. Rice cakes.
Yeah.
And then people who are gluten-free that eat a lot of rice and rice-based product.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's just like anything else, diversifying your diet and just not singling one grain, have some quinoa, have some amaranth, have some, whatever, buckwheat, mix it up with different grains so that you're not just like, I only eat rice.
Yeah.
So.
No, thank you for touching on that. I was actually curious about that. So then now we talked about like quite a few of the different, chemicals or in things that we can get exposed to in our water supply. So, obviously a lot of people are gonna be like, okay, well then what the heck do I even do to, start to filter these out? You mentioned two big things that, there are no safe levels of exposure to, and that's going to be lead and that's going to be PFAS. Now, again, like you've been mentioning, it's going to be a matter of where you live, maybe in certain parts of the country that is going to be or world that is going to be affecting what is contaminating your supply. So could you talk about like steps that if you were just talking with someone that just had no idea like where to even start, like what would be the steps they do to like identify what's going on? And then like, I guess filtration, we could talk about that.
Yeah, sure. The first thing is, if you're in the United States, outside the US, I don't really know how these are monitored.
Mm-hmm.
But in the US, every water municipality is legally required to produce a water quality report annually. And, I used to have mine here. I think I just threw it out a couple weeks ago. I've had my
Perfect
2024 one on my desk for like a year and a half. And then finally I was like, well, I don't need this anymore. So they'll mail it out to you usually. And, the amount of information is sort of standard, but the way it's some of them that's like a really nice brochure and it opens up into this big like poster size. And that's going to be in a more affluent community that has the resources to print something like that. Other communities just get like a single one-page PDF. Like it's really runs the gamut, but the information should be basically the same. And so what that water quality report does is it gives you information of what your water utility has been testing for and found present or not present in the water. And so they're supposed to report on or monitor those 90 plus contaminants and then tell you, here's what we found, and here's the average amount that we found, and here's the highest amount that we found, and here's the potential source of where this chemical came from, here's where we stand in terms of whether or not we meet that Safe Drinking Water Act maximum contaminant level, or the MCL, or MCLG, which is the maximum contaminant level goal, which is where we're trying to get to, but don't always. And again, those are not health standards. So that information is free. People can go online and they can type in their city, Fort Lauderdale water quality report. Or sometimes it's called a CCR, Consumer Confidence Report. And so usually those are printed. You can usually the PDF is available online. Sometimes you can't find the current year. They're usually released in the summer. So I wouldn't be able to find. I hopefully will be able to find 2025's report, but the 2026 is not done.
Right.
So got to wait another 6 or 7 months for that. Provided that they're actually producing them on time. So that's the best place to start for free. If you can't find that, you can go, the Environmental Working Group does have on their tap water database, they do aggregate that information into a singular place where you just put in your zip code. They are not testing water. They are aggregating publicly available data into a single place. So just want people to know that, because the information shouldn't be different from both of those sources. It's just for ease, you can go look up, just plug in your zip code. But I think getting your actual water quality report is important, because it's not just about like what contaminant has been tested for. It's like where your water comes from. Like, people should know this.
Yes.
Where's your water come from? Is it come from an aquifer? Is it piped in, from out of state? Like, where does your water come from? Having a little bit of information about that. Is it groundwater? Is it surface water? Most people aren't going to know what to do with that information, but it's not a bad idea to just learn a little bit about this thing that we drink every day.
Yeah.
And
totally.
where yours comes from, and what your municipality is adding to the water, and what might be there naturally present. So I would just look that up. It's the best information you're going to get for free.
Okay. So then let's say they look this up, they have this information. Is there anything, because there's still things that aren't getting fully monitored for, correct? So is there something else that people can do to identify, or there's so many different water filtration systems now that are being promoted, like two of the bigger ones are like either distillation or reverse osmosis. And, the claims are that they're going to be getting rid of pretty much almost everything. So people just kind of want to hop on that train and just be like, okay, well, perfect, because I'm assuming there's probably a lot of stuff going on in my water. Let me just go ahead and address it with either of those. So is there another step people can further take? And then maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the more common water filtrations. I know we talked about the carbon filter, but maybe kind of diving into distillation and reverse osmosis.
Yeah, I mean, people can, if they have the finances to do it, they can actually test their water directly. This is going to give you a far more accurate test of what is actually coming out of your faucet. The water testing that the municipalities are doing, they're not testing it at your home. Sometimes they do test like end kind of endpoint testing, but usually they're testing further up the at the plant, not at the end of the line. And so getting your water tested to identify what is actually in the water beyond just the basics of, what are, chlorine and lead and, whatever else the city is testing for, to look for some of those unregulated contaminants. There are a couple companies that do this. TapScore is the company that I recommend. I think they're great because they give you on your report. It's not cheap, right? So this is not like a $50 test. So the upshot is these tests are available. The downside is that they're not accessible to a lot of people. Because if your water has some contaminants, not only are you paying, $200, $300 to test your water, then you also have to spend another $200 or $300 probably to filter your water. So it's not a low cost journey here. But if somebody has the resources, I do recommend testing because it gives you the most accurate sort of picture of what's going on. And I like TapScore because they are giving you a couple of different frameworks or metrics, what they're comparing your contaminants to. So they're going to compare it to the Safe Drinking Water Act. Where do you fall? Okay. Do you pass, not pass? And then they're going to look at their state of California, because state of California has some of the highest restrictions or regulations on water contaminants. So they are far more strict than the federal regulations. And so they'll say, here's where you are compared to the Safe Drinking Water Act. Here's where you fall in terms of California that is really, really, really strict regulations. And then here's our kind of more evidence-based health guideline. Because remember, the Safe Drinking Water Act regulations are not health-based. They're a negotiation between health experts and policy folks. And so having those kind of three, it dates me a little bit. I can't remember what they're called. Remember those little things from the I'm almost 50. So those little things where you'd click and it would like move to the next one. It was like the little plastic thing you'd look through.
Yeah.
What are those called?
I don't actually know what they're
I don't
called,
know.
but I have one that's like a Christmas ornament. So yeah, it's super
Okay,
cute.
yeah. So you click through and it like
Yeah.
rotates the little thing. So I literally look at this as like, that's kind of what we're doing. We're looking at the same thing, but we're clicking through to look at these different like rating systems. Safe Drinking Water Act, California's, and tap scores. So I think it gives you a little bit more information.
Cool.
But again, it's not super accessible to people. So if they have the funds, absolutely, I recommend doing it. And if you don't, your water quality report is still it gives you a good foundation of information.
Awesome. And then I guess regarding like the two big systems, like distillation and RO, like what are your opinions on those? Where do you kind of stand with them? Like with, their supports, I guess, in removing a lot of the contaminants from our water supply. Again, a lot of it, this is what I always loved about like how you've talked about water quality is it's important to know what's in your water, and then you can get a filtration system that meets what you need to be clearing out from your water supply. But I'd love for you to touch a little bit on those two systems.
It's really weird. I'll just kind of preface this by saying, I've been doing this again for so long that I keep seeing these like waves of trends of like, this is the best filter for like 18 months. And then it quiets down. And then like a year later, it's like, no, this is the best filter. And I'm just like, oh my God, guys, like, I know you're all trying to sell filters, but take a step back. So distillation systems and reverse osmosis systems are the systems that take out the most. Both have pros and cons.
Yeah.
So for distillation, the one thing that you need to have in a distillation system, which I imagine that most systems have by now, I don't know if this was the case 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but you need to have a carbon filter as part of your distillation system, meaning the water goes through a carbon filter first before the distillation process starts. And the reason for that is if we think about like what is distillation, right? The water evaporates, it condenses, and then it, moves into this other chamber. As water is vaporizing, right? As it's evaporating and vaporizing, if there are volatile chemicals like chlorine that are not like, it's not like chunks of physical lead or whatever. These are volatile chemicals that will go up into that system and then move down into the finished water. And so that is a risk of distillation systems. And so I think that they have to have a carbon filter on the front end. And then I would just really, really want that filter to be robust, because otherwise I'm spending a lot of money on a system that's not taking out things that are really, frankly, pretty easy to take out.
Right. Yeah.
So like that is a problem for me. It's like, I gotta, do all this extra work and make sure that it has this thing and probably test the water, because otherwise why am I spending money on this? So that's an issue. They're also slow. They require electricity. So you got to plug it in. It's energy intensive and it's slow. Reverse osmosis can also be slow. But distillation does remove nearly all dissolved solids. So all metals, all like microbes and bacteria. It's super effective for like the physical, like lead, arsenic, a lot of organic chemicals. But it is, it's a little wobbly on the volatile chemicals from my perspective. Okay. So on the reverse osmosis side, again, reverse osmosis removes the largest spectrum of contaminants: PFAS, fluoride, nitrates, heavy metals, and reverse osmosis is never one filter. It's actually usually two or three. Yeah. So it's never one thing. It's going through stages, and the first stage is usually just like a debris, like any little like bits. It's a physical filter, and then you're going to look at a carbon filter of some type that will take out all those volatile chemicals, because those volatile chemicals can eventually degrade the membrane that the reverse osmosis, that is the reverse osmosis sort of system, how that works. And then a good RO system will actually have a fourth stage at the end, which is, they often call them polishing. And that's where they're actually going to add some minerals back into the water, because both reverse osmosis and distillation systems will remove minerals from the water. Minerals aren't, water isn't our primary source of minerals in our diet, but it is, I think, an important one.
Yeah.
Especially because water that is stripped of all minerals tastes bad, tastes terrible, tastes flat. And so you're not going to drink it. And then you're going to just walking around be dehydrated all the time.
Yeah.
So you want your water to taste good. And I don't know of many distillation systems, and they're very possibly out there. I just literally have not kept up with what's out there. But when I did look, I didn't see these remineralization steps in distillation systems, but they're very, very common in reverse osmosis systems. The downside of reverse osmosis is that it's wasteful.
Yes.
Right. And so what that means is, to produce maybe a gallon of potable water, of drinkable water, it might take 2 or 3 gallons. So they've gotten a little bit better over the years. So maybe it's like 1.5 gallons, but you're still wasting water. And that water, you can't drink it. It goes right down the drain. It's not good to drink. Right. And so, I live in the desert. And water is going to be our next big sort of planetary thing that we are going to have strife over because water is becoming more scarce. And so anything that, like, this is why I don't like it when influencers or whatever online are like, oh, everybody just get a reverse osmosis system. I'm like, yes, that would be like everybody just turning their faucets on and just walking away. And that is colossally wasteful. And so to me, reverse osmosis is if somebody doesn't want to think about it and just like want something that's good, that's going to take out everything, fine. But if you have a little bit more bandwidth to learn or navigate this system, this understanding, I would pause before just immediately jumping to a reverse osmosis. Like I said, I live in New Mexico. We have arsenic in our water. Not everywhere. And Albuquerque, the city that I live in, generally tends to keep it pretty low. But reverse osmosis is the only way to get that out.
Yeah.
So for some communities, like that is literally the only way that they're going to have safe drinking water is through that system. So, both of them are going to remove minerals. So both of them, you want to put them back in. And they're both options, but I really, I don't understand. I know that there's been this wave maybe over the last 2 or 3 years of people saying like, oh, you have to only drink distilled water. And I'm like, why? Like, why? What is your logic and reasoning behind that, aside from the fact that you want to sell your audience a water distillation system?
Yes. Yeah.
So, I've over the years, I have made recommendations of many, many, many different types of products. Water filters has never been one of them because to come from a place of integrity, I cannot say this is the best water filter for you because I have no idea what you're dealing with. And it would be dishonest for me to go out and position any single type of filter and say, this is the best filter for everybody to get, because that's not true. I don't know. Maybe all you need is a Brita filter. Maybe you're good with a $20 Brita filter and you don't need a $350 reverse osmosis countertop thing with glass, pitcher, carafe. It just irks me.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
A lot of things irk me lately.
And that's the thing is that regarding like filtration system, that's why I was excited again to chat with you about this and have people listen, is because I think it gets really confusing and there is basically people that are promoting one specific type of filter. They're just trying to sell their filter. So that's the piece, and just kind of almost taking more of an understanding of like, why is that person, promoting it, but also understanding like, what is it even in your own water supply that you actually might need to help support like your water filtration. I do have one question really quickly regarding RO, with the under the sink filters. So, I mean, you can't really get into those to like the large tanks to like clean them or do anything. Like, are you aware of those like having like any type of like bacteria, like mold issue type thing or anything like that? Or are they usually pretty okay? Okay.
I don't know if anybody's looked at it, to be honest. But like, I don't imagine that it's a meaningful
area to look into.
Issue.
Yeah, it's probably fine.
I know that that's a big concern in like refrigerator water systems, because those just get dirty. Yeah. Like those get dirty because nobody cleans the upper portion of where the water comes out, and then you look under it and you're like, ugh. I don't know if there's if there is any actual evidence supporting the idea that there could be mold growth in your RO under sink system.
Okay.
It's possible, but I haven't seen anything.
Great. One last question before I let you
Yes.
go is just regarding alkaline water. That is another thing that people are, and I'm sure we could probably do another podcast episode on this, part 2. But,
yes.
but just that is something I really want to touch on again, because besides just like either promoting RO or distillation, the alkaline water industry is the other thing that's getting promoted like crazy. And so I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that. And then we will
And that's not
let
new.
you go.
That has been happening forever, right? Forever. So you have to keep in mind that all of these electrolyzed, alkaline, ionizing water systems, they're going to shuffle those words like a deck of cards. Because that also changes. First, it was only marketing through from the basis of it being alkaline. And then it was like, oh no, it's electrolyzed water, it's hydrogen water. And I'm like, it's ionized water. I'm like, you don't even know what any of these words mean, do you?
Just sounds great.
It just sounds like sciencey.
Yeah.
So I don't know of any one of these machines that is not sold through a direct sales multi-level marketing channel. That tells you a lot.
It does.
And so what that means is that in order for somebody to be a rep for these machines, they have to buy the machines themselves. And then now they're like, I'm stuck, and they're expensive. They're like $3,000 to $4,000 or $5,000. And now they're like, well, I have to offload these because I have some money sunk into this product that now I need to sell. And so there are people that are just rabid. And I think it's honestly, to me, it feels almost cult-like with the Kangen reps, because they are so absolutely convinced that they are correct and that anybody who speaks out against them is absolutely incorrect. And the reality is that the claims that are made by whether it's Kangen or whatever the brand is, the claims are not robustly supported by clinical evidence. There's very little evidence supporting the consumption of long-term consumption of alkaline, electrolyzed, ionized, whatever water, and positive health benefits. There are some small studies that suggest that within specific contexts, like hydration or exercise recovery for professional athletes, of which I am not, and you are not, and most people are not, it offers a slight advantage. Minor effects on oxidative stress in animal models, not people. So, and these findings aren't consistent. So it's like, again, I'm always going to be looking at like, what do we know versus what do we suspect but don't have data on? Because we can't compare those two.
Yep.
We just can't. And so, there's not good research that supports these health benefits. And, then, like I said, they keep switching the goalposts. Now it's like molecular hydrogen water, and that also is an antioxidant. So it helps with oxidative stress. Again, there is some emerging research, but again, it's within these very specific use cases that are not, and it's like, well, I don't want to spend $4,000 on a machine that like, it's a lot of money that might maybe have some benefit. Also, these machines don't, as a default base model, come with filtration cartridges.
Yeah.
So now you are taking contaminants in your water and putting them through a electrolyzing process, which can theoretically, very actually change the molecular structure of whatever those contaminants are. And we don't know what they're producing as a byproduct. So like, that's not where we need to be spending our money. The claims aren't validated. There's so much kind of BS, detox and pH balancing and free radical scavenging language that gets thrown around. But like, this is marketing. It's speculative mechanisms that has not been well validated. The other thing is that, and this just makes me, it just kills me. I'm so tired of it. I spoke at a conference. I think it was one of my first ones. This was in 2012. And I remember I had a table at the event, in the event, in the vendor hall or whatever. And there was a Kangen rep there. And he saw my table, and it was about environmental chemicals. And he came over and tried to give me a spiel, but I was like already locked and loaded with like, I'm good. And he's like, let me share. I'd love to share some evidence with you. And I was like, okay. And so he hands me like this like packet of like 30 pages stapled together of quote evidence. And I'm like, honey, these are not independently produced studies. This is marketing materials.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that you know the difference. I'm being snotty here, but like I'm just very, very tired of this perpetual, like nonstop positioning of this product as great. And one of the ways that they use to position this is that like it's a medical device classification.
Yes.
It's a I'm like, okay, well, lots of things are medical devices. And that doesn't necessarily have any merit on whether or not the claims are correct.
Yeah.
They all say that like all hospitals in Japan use these water systems. No, they don't. That's like never been corroborated. And I've seen content from people in the water space saying that they've like inquired at Japanese hospital systems, and their people are like, we don't even know, what are you talking about? I don't even know what that is. So I think there is this sort of aura of foreignness and it being special because it's happening over there that people kind of fall into as if it's, has this like foreign aura about it. So TLDR, don't buy a Kangen water system. And if you're a Kangen water rep, I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
Find a different system. Find something else. I'm not going to make any friends in that water world, and I don't care because I just see people getting ripped off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Completely ripped off. And I'm like, look, for $5,000, you could get a whole house water filtration system that will take out most of the contaminants that you need, and you can get an under sink, system to remove whatever else the whole house system can't.
Yeah.
For $5,000. So come on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like
a lot of things you could spend $5,000 on besides a water machine. Yeah. No, for sure. No. And that's, and that's again, like kind of like what you started with this entire conversation is like, this whole space. It's like, there's so much nuance. I mean, literally like we spent an entire episode just talking about water. We could keep going for another 3 hours. But again, it's just like, providing that education and then providing people with the awareness to educate themselves, which I think is like probably the most important piece because again, were aware of like what is going on in, you were aware of the information regarding like, is there enough information or studies on Kangen water, on alkaline water? But somebody else that was handed that packet would have thought, they wouldn't know. And so that's like where these conversations are really important too. Cause it's like, just maybe do a little bit more research before you believe the person handing, a packet of studies, air quotes to you regarding this information. So Oh, well, this was such a great conversation, Lara. Thank you so much for, being a guest. I would love to just leave it to you to, tell people like where they can find you, what you're up to, and then, call it a day.
Yeah. People, if they want to follow me over on social, I'm at Environmental Toxins Nerd over on Instagram. You can check out my website, which is just laraadler.com. I am doing consulting on environmental health, both for startups, small businesses, health practitioners to help them understand how to weave this into their practice in ways that avoid all of those pitfalls that we were just spent the last hour plus talking about. There's a couple other things over there, but those are the two places where I live is there, and come over and say hi.
Awesome. Thanks, Lara.
You are welcome. Bye.
Bye.